All right. Good morning, everybody. We're back. Hopefully you had a good little break there. Once again, I'm Jim Way. I'm Executive Director of the American Astronautical Society. Thank you very much for being here today. Hope you all enjoyed that first session. So let's get right into it with our next session, Nurturing the Growing Space Economy. Our session chair for this one is, his name is Adrian Mangiuca, I think is how it's pronounced. So thank you very much for being here, Adrian. This session includes 5 presentations. Here they are listed for you. So take a look at those. Some really interesting topics there. And just fair warning, the second presentation will have no audio. I'll come in and mention something about that when it starts up. And without further ado, let's get right into our sessions. So let's roll that first executive summary.
Hello, this is Clark Lackert. I am a shareholder at the law firm of Carlton Fields in the New York office, and I specialize in intellectual property. So what is intellectual property, or also known as IP? It's really legal rights and intangible property, such as patents and concerning inventions, trademarks concerning commercial symbols, copyrights concerning works of authorship, including software, and trade secrets, such as business secrets. And how do we protect IP? IP, despite our global village of Marshall McLuhan and what we call as our One Earth, in fact, it's really still protected at the national level, even though there's certain global treaties concerning IP. And currently, IP rights are enforced through contracts, arbitration, legislatures, and courts, and other administrative bodies. But it's very surprising to me that we've been in space now for over 60 years, and yet we have no really coordinated approach. It is indeed a free-for-all, a no man's land once we leave the surface of the Earth. So to expand commercial use of the ISS and also space in general, whether it's LEO, low Earth orbit, the moon, or Mars, we need to have a safe haven for investment. We have to have intellectual property in space, despite what some might believe that this is somehow going to monopolize or slow down production and enrichment of our possibilities in space. I would argue the opposite, that by having a strong infrastructure in place, we will encourage investment because we know that our funds will be well spent and protected. So we know that in general, the outer space line is the so-called Kármán line of 1,000 kilometers above the surface of the sea. But of course, we are now going well beyond that, and we are now in the new roaring 20s of the 21st century, where we have to protect commercial and scientific activity in LEO, on the moon, on Mars, as we leave this planet to begin habitation elsewhere. So how do we start this? Well, at the moment, we have a lot of activity already at the ISS and elsewhere, for example, scientific experiments, new software, docking spacecraft, proprietary methods, gravity-free environment experiments on products, and so forth. So it's already happening now. We're not looking in the far distant future. Unfortunately, we don't have sufficient intellectual property protection to protect against pirates and counterfeiters, particularly as this activity explodes and mushrooms in the next decades. So what happens next? Well, there are certain laws. For example, the US has a patent law which does protect some activity in space, but in general, of course, trademarks are not copied, copyrights are not protected, and so forth, trade secrets. And there's some UN treaties which deal with these issues. For example, the Moon Treaty, the Rescue Agreement, Liability Convention, the Registration Agreement, the Moon Agreement. All of these are basically looking at physical property, which would be spacecraft and stations and so forth. There is an ISS treaty. It's from 1998, and it does protect, in part, intellectual property. But I would argue, again, that it's 20 years old and it needs updating. As we've seen from the webinars so far, the duties, the activities on the space station continue to change. So the ISS needs to take, in my view, a fresh look, and other governments as well, at how we are going to deal with this new era, if you will, for commercialization and non-government utilization. So what are our urgent action items? First of all, currently look at our contracts, look at our activities. We can add references to space right now. We can put them right in our contracts that we have, at least be aware of the space issues. We certainly should start looking at perhaps amending the ISS treaty, and perhaps even creating a new treaty with the UN or the World Intellectual Property Organization. We certainly also should look at perhaps developing a global consensus about what we want to do, not with just development of space and exploration, but also with how we protect intellectual property in, say, creations of inventions and art and software and all the things we'll be doing in space. So as usual, technology is ahead of the law, but the law urgently needs to catch up on this important issue for consumers, scientists, and businesses alike. Thank you very much.
Okay, folks, once again, this slide has no audio, so we'll sit and take a look at it and advance slides as needed. So enjoy the silence and read along.
Hi, today we're speaking about on-orbit refueling technology demonstrations aboard the International Space Station, starting with Project Furphy and looking beyond to future work at Orbit Fab. I'd like to firstly thank all my co-authors and everyone else involved with Project Furphy from its inception through flight, from our team members to the supporting subcontracting engineers to the personnel within NASA and ISS National Lab who've been invaluable the entire way. The space industry right now lives in a single-use paradigm. There are exceptions with rocket launches, as we're seeing more and more with SpaceX and Blue Origin. But in general, once we build and launch a space asset, no one really expects to reuse that. This is changing. This is changing with satellite servicing, an emerging industry that we're seeing, spearheaded by the likes of Northrop Grumman and other companies and ourselves. So what does Orbit Fab do? Well, we develop and build both fuel tankers, which we launch with third-party launch services to orbit, where we then store propellant on orbit and have that available for satellite servicing or other customers to purchase. And at the same time, we design and build a series of fueling ports. These are standardized interfaces. We call it ours RAFTI, the Rapidly Attachable Fuel Transfer Interface, that can replace fill drain valves on spacecraft, so that spacecraft can be made both compatible with docking and compatible with fuel transfer on orbit. The team at Orbit Fab brings many years of experience, from small space to big space to educational institutions, across an entire gamut of government and commercial space work. So let's talk about Project Furphy. First of all, what is a Furphy? Well, a Furphy is a colonial Australian water tank. You can see some pictures of them on the left here, both in the frontier, which they helped to open up, and below that with troops overseas when they travelled along with the troops during World War I. These water tanks allowed for an inward expansion and kind of a pushing out of the frontier. Orbit Fab saw a parallel with the in-space refueling, in particular this experiment where we used water as a propellant simulant in a tank on board the International Space Station. With Project Furphy, we launched 2 tanker test beds these kind of free-flying vehicles, as we see on the left-hand side, were both launched to the International Space Station aboard separate resupply flights, one on SpaceX 16 and one on SpaceX 17. One of them is what we call the rigid tanker, and it is quite a good facsimile of our 16U minimum viable product CubeSat tanker. It contains about 12 liters of water, 12 kilograms of propellant, and all the feed systems and propellant handling equipment that's necessary, as well as some avionics which can log data around its inertial properties as it's moving. The other vehicle is a little bit more novel. We call it the Flex Tank. Now you can see an early CAD rendition of it here. It's like a bag, if you will, a propellant bag. It's a deployable, inflatable tank where there are kind of two tanks within each other, one of which contains the pressurant and then the other one to contain the propellant. Basically, the con-op of this mission is that we launch these two to the International Space Station. The Flex Tank is inflated inside the International Space Station. They're connected and water is transferred back and forth. At various levels of fill, the astronauts take these and they spin them up to about 30 RPM, and then they stop them and allow them to travel and process in the hallway while we log in inertial data and video camera recording data. At the end of this experiment, the water is then offloaded to ISS, resupplying the ISS with water, since the rigid tank is flown up full of water. This experiment lets us to characterize the way that this propellant behaves inside these different tank topologies on orbit, and look at slosh and residual momentum effects. This video shows an example of the spins that we did on station. So you'll see that Christina brings the vehicle up to speed, up to about 30 RPM. The water within the inside is sloshing and building residual momentum. She then stops the vehicle, holds it still, and then releases it and allows it to free fly. At this point, the residual momentum and slosh effects are dominant within this vehicle, and as a result, the vehicle moves around a little bit within station while our astronaut monitors it, and if it's going to cause any collisions or anything, just controls it. They then stop it and allow it to rest long enough before we repeat it in a different axis. Thank you very much for listening. If you'd like to learn more about the future of on-orbital refueling, about Project Furphy and the correction of the on-orbit anomalies, or about the future mission Mayfly, please check out the 20-minute talk that is available online.
Hello, and welcome to Physical Optics Corporation's presentation on low Earth orbit fiber optic production. I am Howard Warner, Vice President and General Manager of Physical Optics Corporation's Integrated Systems Division. Physical Optics Corporation, known as POC, is an employee of California, and we are approaching our 35th year of business operations. POC has approximately 300 employees, 5 operating divisions, over 160 patents, and a talented mix of engineers and scientists that develop advanced technologies for government and commercial customers. Our Systems Engineering Directorate in the Integrated Systems Division is responsible for the design and fabrication of the orbital fiber optic production module known as the Orbital. In an effort to explore the production of Z-band fibers drawn in microgravity, POC was awarded a contract for its ORFOM project. This effort is funded by NASA's International Space Station program with the sponsorship of national labs to specifically develop increasingly sophisticated fiber optic production systems, or FOPs, to manufacture Z-band fiber in space. These FOPs, known as FOP1, FOP 1.5, and FOP2, are designed to validate the commercial viability of space-based fiber optic manufacturing for a wide variety of end users. Each successive FOP will require less human intervention due to advances in automation and material replenishment. This is a basic block diagram of an FOP system that is very similar to POC's ORFOM design, which is specifically built to produce fiber optics from the exotic glass Z-band. A Z-band preform is slowly fed into a furnace to force the preform to undergo a phase change from a solid to a semi-solid condition. A fiber draw is then initiated and the fiber passes through a diameter monitor that provides feedback for overall system control. The fiber is coated to preserve its integrity and then wrapped around a motorized spool for storage and transportation. POC's objectives with ORFOM are to produce high-quality Z-bland fiber in microgravity, validate the performance characteristics of that fiber, and ultimately commercialize the fiber for applications in medicine, high-powered lasers, and data transmission. Most optical fibers are made from silica glass due to the availability of those raw materials and the ease of manufacturing silica fiber optics in large quantities. Z-bland, on the other hand, is made from the fluorinated compounds of zirconium, barium, lanthanum, aluminum, and sodium. As shown in the comparison chart on the right, the fluorinated glasses made from zirconium and indium, as indicated by the blue and red lines, show similar attenuation losses to that of silica fiber optics, shown in the green line. But the indium and zirconium glasses have much greater bandwidth in the near to mid-infrared spectrum. While Z-bland glass has been around for several decades, its utilization for fiber optics has been hampered by non-uniformities in the fiber that are created when the fibers are drawn in gravity. The black and white pictures on the left of the slide show magnified views of Z-bland drawn in 0G versus 1G. The crystallization in the fiber drawn at 1G is quite evident, while the clarity and uniformity of the fiber drawn in 0G is vastly improved. The graph on the right side shows the bandwidth and attenuation losses of Z-bland drawn in 0G, represented by the orange line, versus that of silica, represented by the yellow line. Low Earth orbit drawn Z-bland has the potential to decrease attenuation losses by 2 orders of magnitude, while nearly providing twice the bandwidth. POC's ORFOM FOP development strategy began in 2017 with the initial build of FOP-1 and its subsequent launch to the International Space Station in 2019. FOP 1.5 is expected to launch at the end of this month or the beginning of October, and it will validate the improvements made in the system hardware and system control. FOP-2, which is currently under development with an expected launch next year, has key objectives to improve automation and fiber quality as the next step in commercializing fiber made in microgravity. Based on the results of the experiments conducted with FOP 1.5 and FOP 2, POC will modify its hardware and software designs for full-rate fiber production in various FOP form factors that accommodate the size, weight, and power limitations of low Earth orbit manufacturing facilities and space modules. For more details on fiber optics, microgravity production of fiber optics, and POC's fiber optic production system, please watch the full presentation.
Hello, this presentation concerns Astroculture, portfolio, development, and assessment. There is an increasing capability to grow plants in space. The Lunar Gateway will have that may include plants. There is an increasing capability to grow plants in space. The Lunar Gateway will have a second life support module called IHAB. That Astroculture research can discover new, valuable genes when plants behave differently in space. Also, plants often exhibit exotic gene expressions when in the space environment. Some of these genes and expressions are valuable for use in space and on Earth. Agriculture is already a trillion-dollar industry. There are still many big problems to solve in both earthbound and space agriculture. Astroculture research comprises a literal blue ocean for investors. There are several ways in which astroculture research could attract investment. First, an important start would be to focus on projects with a clear commercial vision, such as the ability of a commercially important plant variety to thrive in vertical farming or gain resistance to an expensive disease. Second is to select projects that could have a sufficiently large payoff if successful. Third is to become better at placing valuations on future projects. A portfolio approach involves creating a fund that invests in numerous projects and companies. Venture capitalists often use a portfolio approach for investing in early-stage technologies. This approach improves the odds of capturing major hits to cover losses and other portfolio projects. To study the development and assessment of the portfolio approach, we created a computer program that generates Astroculture project results and then bundles these projects into portfolios. Here we see the simulated annual results for 10 portfolios, each containing 10 projects. At this quantity level, we see considerable variability among portfolio performance. We see that portfolio ROI performance converges at about 4,000%. This is lifetime performance as compared to the previous slide that displayed annual performance. Plants can be selected from an experimental population to see which individuals respond to most strongly the project goal. Those individual plants are allowed to reproduce, and their offspring are grown in the next round or generation of the project. With increased access to space, this approach can be conducted for astroculture research, either back and forth between Earth and space or entirely in space. For recurrent selection, improvement in plant trait is linear, at least for several generations. ROI increase would be linear or better for plants valued for a quantity of protein, oil, or other substance. However, this approach is not suitable for all types of plants. A portfolio could be designed to include a certain percentage of recurrent projects. Here's our contact information. Thank you for listening to our presentation. Hello, this presentation concerns Astroculture, portfolio.
It's looping. All right. Well, those are great. Thank you to all of our presenters. So we're going to get into the Q&A section of our session right now. So I'd like to bring up Adrian, our session chair, as we get into these questions. Just real quick, the Q&A tool, ask down the bottom down there. Click on the Q&A, submit your question. You can upvote other people's questions, things like that. It's a really effective tool and really good for our presenters. He will be. Adrian is ready to go. So share, we can stop the share there. And Adrian, are you up?
All right. Yeah. Can you hear me okay?
Yep. Take it away, Adrian. Great.
Awesome.
Thanks.
All right. Hi, my name is Adrian Mangiuca. I'm currently the BD Director for Space Solutions at Made in Space. As a reminder, everybody, our wonderful panelists today were in order: Carl Lackert, shareholder at Carlton Fields; Dmitry Starodubov, Technology Officer at FOMS; James Bultitude, Chief Engineer at Orbit Fab; Captain Howard Warner, VP of Integrated Systems at Physical Optics Corporation; and Mark Ciotola, lecturer at San Francisco State University. So for our panelists, we've got a couple of questions in from the pre-submissions. I would like to go through those and then move on to the Q&A asked here during the presentations. Our first question comes from Pankaj Srivatsava, and it's directed to Carl Lackert. The question is, the U.S. ecosystem for nurturing of commercial space activities can be considered one of the best in the world. What do you consider to be the elements included as the main contributors to that ecosystem? I know you talked a lot about IP, but what else makes the U.S. so innovative and nurturing for these commercial space activities?
Well, thank you. That's a very good question. The U.S. system, first of all, has one of the basic elements of many other countries, which is we have an established intellectual property legal structure, which has been amended actually several decades ago because of the World Trade Organization, and it's called the TRIPS Agreement, which gave a floor of protection for intellectual property. So the good news is that most countries now have the basic patent law in place, copyright, trade secret, trademarks, and all the different items I was talking about. So as far as other countries are concerned, and the US, we need to look at not only whether the law is in place, but whether the law is enforced, and if there are sufficient structures to enforce the law, whether it's a court, administrative body, and so forth. So as we move forward into space, what I was talking about is we need to take a fresh look at how do we have jurisdiction in space? How do we enforce IP in space? You had mentioned the US system, which of course is very pro-innovation. Other countries as well. The Europeans have many important developments in East Asia, Korea, Japan, and so forth. So as we move forward, though, we need to make sure that the law is there in place, which it isn't right now. As I said, it's a no man's land in many ways. And then we also need, in phase 2, will be to get those enforcement structures in place so that we can actually rely on the system to protect commercial investment at the ISS and elsewhere.
Yeah, that's great. Appreciate that, Carl. Want to really quickly follow up with you, Carl, since we got you on the line. A good question here in the Q&A. We're going to bounce forward really quickly because it's related. But how would using the World Intellectual Property Organization for space actually work? That question comes from Brian Harvey.
Okay, another good question. Again, we're looking forward here. So the WIPO is in Geneva, Switzerland. It's a UN-based agency focusing on only intellectual property. It's been around a long time, many decades, and it's been very helpful to reach that global consensus we're talking about because it is hooked into the UN. If we have some form of expansion, right now we have sort of national treaties. The ISS treaty I mentioned in '98 has, I think, 15, 20 members or something. We have, as you know, 200 countries. So if we're going to start a global, a protection for IP in space, we're going to need an international organization eventually, like WIPO. The basis of that protection would be a treaty, which was what WIPO does. It manages many, many global treaties. This one would extend its jurisdiction not only to the countries, the 200 countries, but also to space. And then we would have to get those implementing, as I said earlier, administrative bodies to actually enforce the law. But first we have to actually make the decision of what exactly we have in mind for space to protect all these innovative activities we've been talking about over the last few days in these different webinars.
That's great. Thanks, Clark. Next question is kind of combined because I'm seeing some really great relations between what we got during the pre-sessions and the Q&A here. But it comes from Sayuri Tanaka, and it's directed at Orbit Fab. So James, you're up. So very curious here about actual costs. How much will it cost when commercial customers eventually seek to buy propellant directly from the services you're offering? And then to kind of follow that up, would love to understand how important the ISS was to testing that product's development out to the point where you think you can build up the business case to even determine what that cost will be. So James, over to you.
Yeah, cost is obviously very important. And the answer to the question of how much will it cost, we don't like to talk about a cost per liter of propellant or things like that. It's very variable as you look at different orbits and locations and different propellants and different quantities. The simple answer is whatever the value of the propellant is to the customer, we're going to come in significantly under that number. And there's a bunch of work that we do. The focus of our whole business is basically getting the cost down of the propellant, getting into the right place to enable that. That's why we're an independent business that just does putting propellant in orbit, getting it into the right place, and the technologies associated with that. And we don't do any other satellite servicing or kind of other activities. It lets us have that focus in order to get that cost of goods sold to the right place. You asked about the development that we did on ISS and how important that was, and I would say it's absolutely imperative. We founded our company in January of 2018, and we worked with ISS National Lab, and we're under contract by June of 2018. I joined the company at that time, and we were flying in October, November, handed over hardware in October, flew in November. There are very, very few ways that you can go through that level of technology development and get something actually flying. And for a lot of the technologies we're working with, particularly since they're fluid technologies, simulation only gets so far. These systems are highly complex with microgravity and fluids and moving them around. trying to simulate a flexible bag filled with propellant is really, really computationally intensive and hard to validate. And so we were really able to generate a lot of good data, but also show that we're capable of flying hardware really quickly, which is very important to the rest of the industry, customers, investors, everyone, and even to other new hires that we want to bring into the company. Really helps us to show that this is the kind of place to work where we build and fly things and learn stuff and, you know, follow the scientific method and not just a PowerPoint, if you will.
Thanks a lot for that, James. Very insightful. This question comes from Lynn Harper, and it is directed
I'm sorry? I'm sorry, couldn't hear.
The boilers.
Boilers. Oh, very well. Okay.
Mark. Actually, good that you're not muted, because this question's actually for you, Mark. Over at San Francisco State University, from Lynn Harper. Mark, would you be able to describe a little bit more about how you got to those ROI calculations in those ROI charts that you presented a little earlier?
Sure, I'd be happy to. One clarification on the standard deviation chart, the y-axis should be actually ROI standard deviation, not ROI itself. The other ones, it is ROI. So what we did is for revenue, we baselined some of the plant licenses out there. Some of the big ones, small ones, came up with an exponential decay profile using industry figures, and then applied the types of costs that we have identified by some of our own research and interviewing people in the field. The question is, would the parameters of our exponential decay be similar to Earth industry? We can't say for sure, but if they were, this is what it would look like. The second figure is for recurrent selection, and there are two ways to look at that. One is that you're going to be doing new types of experiments in space with plants that you weren't able to do on Earth. So you could have the benefit of a whole new class of recurrent selection that's never been done here. It's not reflecting Earth figures. On the other hand, you could look at it in that the figures we've taken from industry may already include recurrent selection, in which case the ROI figures would be lower.
Understood. Thanks for that, Mark. Okay, so this is a more general question here, and I'd like to direct it at Dmitry Starodubov at FOMS, since the conversation there is really about overall space industrialization. So maybe you'll be able to answer it at a higher level, Dmitry. But it comes from Lisa Denzer, and she asks, how important is competitiveness for the development of the market? And how can we achieve a more competitive environment, taking into account current subsidy regimes?
Thank you. The critical part of building the space economy is building healthy cash flow based on competitive advantages or enabling factors of the space economy. What we have selected as our business model is optical fiber manufacturing on International Space Station platform. If you look at the numbers, the efficiency is the key factor for our payload, commercial efficiency. Existing optical fibers of the same type built on the ground have been priced at about $100 to $200 per meter. If we look at the values of manufacturing capabilities of our payloads, they have roughly the weight of about 50 pounds, and they can produce about 50 kilometers of fiber. At the 2-year back price of delivery, the materials to the station and back of around $60,000 per kilogram, we are roughly at $30 per meter additional price. So we have a healthy margin to go into the commercial utilization of the manufacturing potential of International Space Station and pay for the services of delivery of the hardware to the station, provided we can make fiber better on the ground and bring this enabling capability or add on value of space manufacturing to the end customer. That's exactly our path of commercialization. And with the existing pricing of space services, we should be able to bring the capability to commercial success and be paying for the services in the medium future with our production capabilities. Thank you.
Yeah, it's an excellent answer, Dmitry. I know that's something that all of us in the industry here are concerned about. So good to hear that you're thinking about it so clearly. This next question, I really want to give all of our panelists a chance to weigh in first. So I'm going to direct this next question at Captain Howard Werner over at POC. It comes from Kwang Han K. And even though it's to all the panelists, I think it's broad enough that anyone can answer. But again, within this context of optical fiber, Kwang Han asks, can speakers discuss on when and how space companies expect that time where investors really get interested and where they begin implementing project ideas and when they eventually get to be profitable? So it's really that kind of phased process of, you know, initial investment, implementation of ideas, and then profitability and productization of the product that you're building in space. How long until each of these steps is reached, and how do you in your company, but how can we generally in the industry work on lowering those hurdles while at the same time running this business that you know has so much to prove? So Howard, if you'd like to take that on, either from your perspective or from the perspective of the industry as a whole, would love to get some of your thoughts on that.
Okay, just want to make sure I unmute myself so I'm not talking silently. Good morning, gentlemen, and to the assembled team here, ladies and gentlemen. Yeah, I think that going back to Dmitry's answer about competition, I mean, look, our country has survived with 3 major car companies for quite some time, and I think it provides the market many options and depth on the bench, and it does give our national industry an opportunity to have choices and a much larger supply chain. And so tied into that, to answer this question that you presented, we've taken a look at and we continue to refine the business model with our the assistance of our business development team. And I think in the near term, in order to succeed, to get to commercialization, programs such as this, sponsored by NASA and the national labs and funded by NASA, is really the key driver in getting innovative solutions up into space, and that iterative process, right, of just getting up and getting down and getting up and getting down is so beneficial. I think with our 3 iterations or our fiber optic production machines, what we are finding is that with each progressive increase in sophistication, we are finding a much better quality fiber. And so our timeline, looking at where we are at in order to commercialize, we have to be able to be consistent, repeatable, have a high quality fiber every single time that we go up into space. As Dmitry identified, it's not inexpensive. And so we want to make sure that as we start manufacturing in low Earth orbit, we can repeat that quality time and time again with minimal human intervention, because obviously the astronauts and the scientists' time up in space is also quite resource intensive. And so from POC's perspective, we think about another 2 years of development and incremental improvements will allow us to produce sufficient quantities of fiber such that we can now confirm and make a very compelling business case that there ought to be a permanent solution up in low Earth orbit, whether it's aboard the International Space Station during the remainder of its existence, or aboard other spacecraft and platforms, such as the Sierra Nevada Dream Chaser or the Axiom space modules. And so as we look ahead, I think from a fiber optic perspective, now I think perhaps the other businesses and the other innovations that are going up to manufacture in low Earth orbit can experiencing the same thing. We're looking at probably a 5-year timeline where we're in full rate production. There can be some efficiencies inside of that from today. So I think we're looking at 2024 to 2025 timeframe. But quite frankly, that buys us time as the developers to identify the broader scope of the market and the applications, right? So fiber optics in space has wide-ranging applications from medical purposes to military to commercial to online transactions. And so from POC's perspective, we are thankful that NASA has given us access to low Earth orbit. We will continue to pursue this effort and define the marketplace and the supply chains to ensure that not only do we repeatably and consistently provide the product, but we're able to deliver on a sustained basis. So a lot of high level discussion there, but I can dig down deeper if so desired. So thank you.
Yeah, really appreciate that, Howard. I think this next question might even give you an opportunity to weigh in, but it is about manufacturing generally. So I'd like to go back to Dmitry a little bit, and then Howard, I think if you or any of the other panelists have something to say, please go ahead, raise your hands, and we'll get to you. But Dmitry, an anonymous attendee asks from the Q&A, would you be able to discuss the kinds of demonstrations or proofs that your investors need to see in order to support increases in investment in your manufacturing, assuming that the market for in-space manufactured products is big enough? Yeah, what do those investors really want to see from you before you've really got a product to sell?
I would like to follow up on the question that Howard answered. We are implementing a unique business model of organic growth at FOMS, which is quite an unusual approach. We are building the new capability of fiber manufacturing in space, and in fact, we have a steady flow of commercial revenue. Our approach here is not to bet on selling just optical fiber that would kick in a few years down the road in the full scale. We developed unique manufacturing capabilities, unique technical solutions, and our business model includes selling the intellectual and licensing intellectual property, sharing our solutions with our business partners, which we are lucky to have, and sell services that we build for enabling the capabilities of manufacturing on ISS. I apologize that my presentation was not running, but that's exactly what we are targeting here. We are targeting the transition of International Space Station from just research lab into manufacturing warehouse. The unique time that we live in brings us the opportunity to utilize the growing capacity of delivery to International Space Station. And Elon Musk joked about Tesla stock at 420. I looked today, it's 430. So his other joke was about running $2 million per trip on his Starship. That brings the value of space delivery below the fries at McDonald's. So how we utilize this capacity, how we use it up, we can build plants on orbit and add the value of that manufacturing. That's how we make money. So our ability to transition from research into manufacturing and make money through that process is the key. The way we built our business model is we bootstrapped, personally invest into the company. So we don't have to report to our investors. We are the core of our business execution team, and we make money on the way. We are not projecting the revenue. We are getting commercial revenue through sales of our services and our capabilities. Please look at our presentation. We report here and advertise the new manufacturing capability that will be enabled this year on ISS, where we'll have dual locker unique manufacturing platform that is specifically modular and designed to address the needs of industrial customers. That's basically our model. We are making money while we are building up that capability that will address the defense, medical, and telecommunication markets. Thank you.
Thank you, Dmitry. Howard, do you have anything to add to that? I know that it's kind of a broad question.
Well, I do, and I think I'd like to drill back into the aspect of your question regarding investors and as companies down the road and venture capitalists and just investors in general look at potential opportunities. I think in the case of what we're focused on in the exotic glass fiber optic made up in low Earth orbit, we have to demonstrate the theory to practice. We have to show that there is a order of magnitude or greater improvement in the performance of the fiber, right? The cost of manufacturing fiber in space has to offset the value to the customer, right? So if we can demonstrate that, hey, with a multi-mode fiber that can transmit a much wider bandwidth with much more energy, suddenly it opens up the development of new technologies. But we have to drive that cost per meter down. And I think we have, I mean, when I say we, I think POC, we have a pretty clear vision of what those approximate values are going to be. But ultimately, that return on investment has to be validated by performance. If we only see marginal improvement after this iterative development, then it is unlikely that the market is going to want to drive or invest. Now, however, what we have seen, and I think what some of the other companies have seen that are producing fiber optics in space, is that there is great potential there. And so I think that, quite frankly, what investors or what other interested parties or collaborators are going to want to see is they're going to see the quantitative improvement of performance, because then, as I mentioned, that really does open up what you can transmit through that fiber. And I think it can quantumly change the performance of certain technologies, such as really lasers, data transmission, countermeasures for military purposes, offensive weapons for military purposes. So again, I'll just dial it back. It all boils down to performance. And I think that now that we have access to low Earth orbit, we're going to find out if these exotic glasses do what we think they're going to do. And we're excited to be part of that. So I'll stop there.
Really appreciate that, Howard. This next question, I hate to do this, but it's so broad and at the same time so important that I really think anybody could kind of answer it. So first come, first serve. I'm sorry to do that, our MCs here, but it comes from Brian Harvey, and Brian asks, are the panelists eager to use a commercial space station versus the ISS? So obviously NASA has recently awarded the Next Step Appendix I solicitation for context to Axiom Space, and was thinking for a long time to release the Next Step Appendix K solicitation and release that out so that a free-flying space station in low Earth orbit could take over some commercial activities from the ISS. So very curious to get a read on the panelists' thoughts on commercial space stations versus the ISS and the utility thereof. I really think this can be something that everyone has something to say about. So maybe let's take it in order and say, Mark, You know, in regards to astroculture, is this something that you've been thinking about?
Definitely, yes. NASA and ISS have a great deal of restrictions over the types of activities and experiments that you can do. A private space station can be much more relaxed on that. They have a much different risk profile.
Okay, that's great. Yeah, very short and sweet. Howard, I'm going in backwards order here. Do you have something brief to say on commercial versus ISS?
You know, so we have explored the full commercial up and down, to and from space with a couple of companies that are in that business. And, you know, again, I would say that I think it's a very viable path forward. I do think the value of what we are accomplishing as an industry, as innovators, not just at POC, but across the board, will demonstrate the value of gaining access and ultimately that overhead associated with whether it's a NASA sponsored or whether it's just full commercialization through SpaceX or Axiom or Sierra Nevada. You know, we're believers. We believe that we will be able to drive those costs down, and the return on that investment will be a big gain for all industry and all applications of technologies.
Appreciate that, Howard. James, anything to say on commercial space stations versus the ISS potentially?
Yeah. First of all, I would say yes, we'd be interested in making use of that capability. I think one of the first questions was about why the US is such a good place for innovation. And the answer is that there is money available quickly and in the right kind of quantities that people need to actually do the work. And so I would say that a commercial space station taking over some of the commercial activities would have to still have government subsidy for technology research and development, those early stages, much like we get with ISS National Lab. And that would be quite powerful. But it really opens the door that right now we have almost the problem that when people want to go to an operational capability, we don't have as many good mechanisms for you to fly something for money and sell a service for money. It's almost better at research and development than it is operational capability. So it could open up that. And I also want to say that what we do, we want to see these kinds of things happen so we can support those activities. Along with the ISS being up there, there is a lot of support and resupply that is required. And so we're excited about supporting those kinds of activities in the future.
Excellent. Thank you. Dmitry, anything to say?
I would like to say that commercial space station is definitely an exciting opportunity that we evaluated commercially. And I think the greatest value of running commercial is less regulations and faster time to market. Definitely an exciting and attractive opportunity. But one thing that I wanted to say is don't write off the International Space Station and NASA on commercial side. We have really outstanding management team at NASA, and I think commercial services through ISS will blossom in the very near future, judging on how aggressive and how radical the team works on keeping the space station and making a commercial revenue stream available for supporting the ISS. So I think on our end, we run our models, and what we see is that on our International Space Station, we are capable of running approximately 100 kilometers per month production runs without sacrificing our operation and customer needs. If we go beyond 100 kilometers per month, we definitely have to consider scaling up manufacturing outside of human habitat and make it into dedicated commercial installations such as commercial space station.
Thanks, Dmitry. That's awesome. Carl, want to see what you think about commercial versus ISS space stations.
Right. Yeah, thank you, Adrian. Actually, it's a natural evolution. We started out as a government station, then now it's a partnership station, and eventually there will be a commercial station. It may very well be a successor station, but it's definitely coming. And I think that, as I want to go back to one point that Dmitry said, which is really important, and we haven't really talked too much about it, but I want to say the way to break down the timeline and the cost and the risk is through licensing. And Dmitry mentioned that not every company can be manufacturing in space, but if they do own IP in space, such as a patent, a trademark, and so forth, they can license it. So literally, you can have a company with 100 employees that needs a lot more labor-intensive work. If it's licensing its space technology, it will be a very profitable company, but in addition, short timeline and less risk and less harassment of the employees and the officers. And this may very well be the lead-in to commercial space stations. As we know, we're already going to be planning on orbiting hotels and a lot of other flying objects, which are not necessarily commercial general space stations, but there will be a lot of more commercial activity in space. And that's why I said, if you're going to license it, you need to protect the IP first, because then you'll have nothing to license.
Awesome. Yeah, that was a great response from everybody. I definitely going to take a look at the recording after this and jot down some of that word for word. Really, really good thoughts. We've got 4 minutes left here, so I'm going to take moderator's prerogative and ask about something that I've been very interested in, which is the idea of breaking into entrenched markets. In particular, I want to talk a little bit more with Mark from San Francisco State U about breaking into the very entrenched market of a commercial agriculture. And you know, it's something I've been thinking about, especially in my last career at Nanoracks, how to approach companies that have very well formulated plans for basic research already, that have a lot of institutional inertia. You know, it's a multi-billion-dollar industry, but you got to get them to believe that researching things in space is worth it and can generate a profit. So if you could talk a little bit, Mark, to kind of your strategy and how you nuance your approach to be taken seriously when you enter a room and say, hey, I want to do cool stuff in space, needs some money, but it's going to be good for you in the long term. What's your strategy?
Well, okay, it's actually a $1 trillion industry, but it's a very conservative industry. So there's different parts. There's research, and then there's the application scaling up. You're probably going to have to go through traditional firms and companies for these kind of the production and the scaling up and the distribution. However, there's a lot of people like in university researchers, some people, also independent companies, who are literally chomping at the bit to do research projects. They're doing some, but there's some that are commercially targeted, but that they're not yet getting the funding for. Another aspect to this is that there's big ag companies that, you're right, they have their own entrenched research programs, but the fact is they have big unsolved problems, and they realize that there's going to be a much greater need for a much bigger food supply to feed an increasing population, overcome or at least meet climate change challenges as well. I mean, there's a lot of areas that are becoming more arid, for instance, where current crops just aren't going to grow, and there's going to be a lot of hungry people. They realize that if you can show them that you can solve a problem, they are interested. I've been talking to them, and if you have the IP, then presumably they've got to pay you for it.
That's awesome. Thanks, Mark. I think we're in our last few seconds here, so I would like to thank all the panelists, but I'll hand it over to the MC. It's been a pleasure, guys. Very informative. So
thank you, Adrian.
Thanks.
Indeed.
Thanks, Adrian.
Excellent. Thank you very, very much, everybody. We really appreciate your time. And Adrian, thank you so much. Adrian, I've neglected to mention before, he is the let's see, he's Business Development Director for Space Solutions at Maiden Space. So thank you again, Adrian, very much. Appreciate it. Okay, so now we're in break. We're going to take a break until noon Eastern, which is 4 p.m. Universal. We'll reconvene right here in this same webinar for our next session on cell biology and gene expression. So you can just leave this window open, leave the meeting open if you want, and please do come back in about 45 minutes for our next session. Thanks, everybody. Talk to you soon.